Hello. Can someone just comment and tell me if you can see me at the moment? And that you can see the PowerPoint. Oh, excellent. I think there's a little bit of a lag. So I might not see comments as they immediately come, but we'll do our best. You never know I was a professional human trainer with my tech phobe attitude. So we'll wait a few minutes just to make sure that anyone who's slightly late can join. Thank you everyone who's commented to say they can see me. If you want to say hello whilst we're waiting for people to join, do. Thank you, Gemma, for telling me there's a bit of a delay. This is my cat, who's co-hosting for me today. His name is Hector, and he's a little baby. And if I try and shut him out, he'll just cry the whole time. So say hello. He's a miserable little bastard, but he'll probably walk in front of my screen about 1,000,000 times. And walk all over my notes, which is also very useful. For those of you who know Podrick, he's in his crate with a frozen cow hoof, just because he's had a walk, but I didn't want him to kind of get too involved at the moment. Oh, I'm going to try sharing. Let me see if I can share full screen slide. Okay, I just waited for the lag just to make sure that you guys could see the whole screen. So what I'll do is I will get started. You're going to see a lot of me moving him throughout the day. So welcome everyone to my talk about dogs and domestic abuse. I haven't timed it, so I'm hoping that it's going to be around an hour, but we may go slightly over just because there is a lot of information in here. So just a little introduction to who I am, because some of you know me and some of you don't. Firstly, I'm just going to put a trigger warning right at the beginning. You might have seen it on the previous slide as well. We are going to be discussing, or I'm going to be discussing some distressing topics. So we're going to look at physical and sexual abuse against people, as well as animal abuse. There is a high probability that some of you attending are survivors of abuse. So if at any point the talk gets too much for you, please don't feel like you have to stay and watch it live. It is recorded, so you could watch it in chunks if that's more manageable for you, or if you just find it too much, please don't put yourself through it. At the end of today, we'll put up some helplines for survivors or those who may want to contact support services. If you're not here by the end, I will actually share them in the event group as well, so you will have access to them. So just take care of yourselves as we go along today. And who am I, and why am I talking to you? I am a trainer. by trade. I currently work as a violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence trainer for a national Welsh charity, and so I am knowledgeable in human aspects of trauma. I've also worked frontline for several years as an independent sexual violence advisor. So I worked with predominantly young adult survivors of all forms of sexual abuse, including domestic abuse as well. And I also have a master's in human rights law. I sit on some of the editorial boards in Wales for some stuff. Can't go into too much detail, but I'm quite knowledgeable in humans. I'm not a dog professional or a pet professional. The beautiful collie you see on the screen is Podrick. Some of you probably recognise him. And I really got into, well, my passion for dogs really started when I got him almost 2 years ago. I've been absolutely blessed to, or had the privilege of having friends in the dog community that really inspired me and helped me kind of raise Podrick in a way. And Podrick came to me at a very kind of dark place in my life, and we're going to go through that slightly later about how dogs can actually give you that support that other humans possibly can't. And then just to say that we are going to be focusing on dogs today as the main topic when we look at domestic abuse, and that's obviously not to say other pets can't be used and during domestic abuse. Is absolutely not true. However, we are at the virtual dog conference, so we are going to be mainly focusing on dogs and the impact of domestic abuse on dogs as well. I know that there may be some people viewing from other countries or areas. Any laws or legislation that I speak about are purely UK based, just because that's where I live and I work, and that's what I'm knowledgeable about. However, the dynamics of domestic abuse don't change no matter where you are in the world. It's still a huge issue, and whilst the laws may vary, the actual forms of abuse won't. I welcome worldwide viewers. And lastly, just a point about language. So we talk about this. We are going to go over it slightly as we go through today, but this talk reflects the gendered nature of domestic and sexual abuse, and that is that it's mainly a crime committed by men towards women. So the vast majority of survivors are women, and the vast majority of perpetrators are men. So the language that I use will reflect that. So I may use he, him for perpetrator, she, her for survivor. That's not to say that there are no male survivors of domestic or sexual abuse, and there are no female perpetrators, because there are. But that the language that I use reflects that gendered nature, and it's really important that we remember that it is a gendered issue. And on the basis of that, we will look at statistics around that. I'm not going to tolerate any comments or rhetoric around feminism, or that what about the menism, or any of that. I just won't tolerate it. I am an expert in my topic. What I am going to speak about is facts, and facts aren't an opinion. They are literal truth. So if you have a problem with that, then maybe this isn't the talk for you. But I will not tolerate anyone else making anyone else feel less than as we go through today. And as I said, some of you may have seen my comment in my event that obviously I am welcome comments, questions, debate even, but it has to remain respectful at all times to myself as a trainer, but also to each other in the view who are viewing. As I said, you may have survivors, and it's really important that we are sensitive around this subject. I'm going to ask people who are there we go. Sorry, I've hidden the little thing that says I'm sharing my screen now. So what was I going to say? Please make any notes of any questions that you have. Make a note of them, and then ask them at the end. So I'm going to do a question and answer at the end. But I'm not going to be able to kind of keep an eye on the questions in the chat and talk to you at the same time. not that sophisticated. So please do think about questions, write them down on a piece of paper in your phone, and then at the end, when we come to the questions, then please do ask them then. So we're going to start by looking at what actually is the link between domestic abuse and animal abuse. So research has shown that there is a strong correlation between animal abuse and domestic violence. So men who are violent to women may threaten to harm or kill a pet in order to intimidate their partner or their ex-partner. You can see some of the statistics on the screen there, so I'll just go through them. So history of pet abuse was found to be one of the 4 most significant risk factors of one's becoming a domestic abuse perpetrator. Domestic abuse perpetrators who also abuse pets are more dangerous and use more forms of controlling behaviours than domestic abuse perpetrators who do not use animals. 76% of survivors whose partners had histories of pet abuse had been strangled, 26% had been raped, and 80% feared that they would be killed by their perpetrator. 41% of individuals arrested for domestic abuse had committed at least one act of animal abuse since the age of 18. And the little question at the bottom of the screen is from the domestic abuse, stalking and harassment risk assessment that we use as frontline workers to determine risk. And one of the questions that we ask when we speak with survivors who are thinking about leaving or fleeing domestic abuse is, has the perpetrator or has the abuser ever mistreated an animal or family pet or threatened to do so? Because if that box is ticked yes, and obviously it's within the context of the other questions. There are 27 questions on the dash, Rick. It would make our ears prick up a little bit in terms of risk levels. It's also important to know that when perpetrators of intimate partner violence have a history of animal abuse or are abusing the pet alongside of abusing the survivor, survivors actually wait 20 to 50 violent incidents before contacting the police. So what we found is that animals are or pets are kind of a barrier to leaving in some instances, because people don't want to leave their animal with the abusive partner or ex-partner, so they will stay for longer than survivors who don't have pets. I'm just going to move me into the corner. Maybe you can see the slide. So we're going to look at what is domestic abuse, because there's a lot of myths around what it actually is, what it actually looks like, and thanks to kind of TV, media and news. So we're just going to go through what the actual definition is from the UK government definition. This is so the cross-government definition of domestic abuse is any incident, so it could be just one incident, or pattern of incident, so more than one, of controlling, coercive, threatening behaviour. So what that is not physical abuse. So that's mental, financial, psychological, etc. Violence or abuse, so that's your physical and sexual types of abuse, between those aged 16 or over who are or who have been intimate partners, so in a relationship, or family members. So it could be parents, cousins, son to parents, etc., regardless of gender or sexuality. So it doesn't matter who you are, if you're male, female, non-binary, or your sexuality. So if you're a member of the LGBTQ plus community, it's an all-encompassing definition around the actual forms of domestic abuse. And there are 5 main types of abuse that are often touted. So they are physical, sexual, psychological, which we call coercive control / gaslighting, which we're going to look at in a second. Emotional, and that's different to psychological, because when we speak about emotional, we're talking about lowering self-esteem and confidence. So calling them names, saying that they shouldn't go out with their friends, etc. That's kind of more emotional. And then psychological is like micromanaging of everyday behaviours. But we'll look at that in more detail in a second. Financial, so controlling money / economic. So they are actually different. So financial speaks to controlling the money that's between the two or the family, and economic is more about restricting access to essential resources, so food, clothing, or transport, employment or education. So are they preventing them from working or going to school, university, etc. Really important that we speak about coercive control because it underpins every form of domestic abuse. It's not something that lots of people have heard about, but it is actually the main form of abuse that's used. So it is a act or pattern of acts of assault, threats, humiliation, and intimidation, or other abuse that is used to harm, punish, or frighten. So coercive control is actually about maintaining fear, which maintains that entrapment of the survivor. Fear is a very good motivator to not annoy and not trigger someone regarding the abuse. It's designed to make a person dependent by isolating them. So when we, quite a classic thing around domestic abuse is that they'll cut them off from friends and family and prevent them from getting additional support. Depriving them of independence, regulating their everyday behaviour. So things like can they use the bathroom? How many times a day can they use the bathroom? Do they time them when they go to the bathroom? Do they, those kinds of things? So micromanagement of everyday behaviour. Most domestic abuse survivors experience coercive control rather than isolated physical assaults. So there's this bit of a myth that domestic abuse is only if you are physically assaulted, which is absolutely incorrect. Lots of people experience domestic abuse that are never physically harmed, and it's that psychological abuse that is the most damaging. That's what survivors say, because things like broken bones and wounds heal, but the internal damage really does carry on for years or for the rest of their life. And just a statistic about coercive control. We've seen a huge increase in people coming forward around coercive control. And so you can see there that in the year ending March 2018, there were just under 10,000 reports to police. And in 2019, there were over 17,000. So you can see it's a huge increase in between the years. And coercive control is in and of itself a crime in the UK. So it's against the law under the Serious Crime Act of 2015, Section 76, carries a maximum of 5 years imprisonment, a fine, or both. There are issues with people not knowing that it's in and of itself it is a crime. But there's also issues at the moment around police and their handling of coercive control cases, because some of what coercive control is to outsiders looks quite minimal, and so it can be difficult for survivors to really express the damage that it's doing, because it could be quite small things to someone else, but to them it's a huge deal, especially around fear. So just very quickly going to look at the Power and Control Wheel. So the Duluth Power and Control Wheel was developed as a result of a project by a women's refuge and local police in Duluth in America, it's the town of Duluth, about 40 years ago. It's still, what they did was they basically spoke to hundreds of survivors, and they found out what the main 8 categories of how someone abuses are, and they made notes of that, and they developed this wheel. So at the center of the wheel is power and control, and that's really what is at the core of all forms of domestic abuse, is having power and control over someone else. That's what perpetrators want, that's what they feed off, that's what they fear losing. So that's why that's in the middle. Around the outside, you have the physical forms of abuse, so violence and sexual abuse, and then the 8 inside are kind of that coercive control type behaviours. So using coercion and threats, so making and or carrying out threats to do something to hurt them, threatening to leave them. If you leave me, I'm going to kill myself, etc. Threatening to report them to like social services, get their children taken, intimidating her to drop charges or making her do illegal things so that they have something on that person. So if you go to the police and tell on me, I'm going to tell them about all this illegal stuff that you've done. They'll intimidate her, so things like using looks, actions, or gestures. So this is a really interesting one for when I'm talking about outsiders. Domestic abuse perpetrators will sometimes use things like they'll have a way of looking or glaring at a survivor, and to everyone else that will just look like them looking at the survivor, but the actual threat is in the look, and so it's a really important way that they use intimidation. They might smash things near the survivor, but not at them. So a lot of the time they'll smash plates at their feet, or they'll throw knives or things at them, but they won't actually hit the person. And they've done that deliberately, because it's like, if you don't do what I say the next time that I do that, it is going to hit you, kind of thing. Abusing pets is obviously on there. We're going to look at that in a lot more detail. And displaying weapons. So there was quite a famous case Thames Valley Police did, where they went into a house where domestic abuse had been reported. And what the perpetrator had done is they'd placed steak knives, or like massive kitchen knives, on either side of each stair. So every time that survivor that had to go upstairs or downstairs, they walked past the knives. And so that person's not saying, I'm going to stab you verbally, but the threat is there in the house. So that's what we mean by using intimidation. Emotional abuse is quite self-explanatory. So putting them down, making them feel bad about themselves, calling them names, so like saying you're ugly, you're fat, no one else is going to want you, that kind of thing, making her think she's crazy. So that's gaslighting. So think when they do something or say something, and then when you respond, they say you're making a big deal out of it, or that didn't happen. They might just flat out deny that they did it. They might say, you're losing it. They basically distort reality so that the survivor doesn't actually know what's real and what isn't anymore. So playing mind games. So I have a really good actually case study of this. So when I was working frontline, I had a case where the survivor, the perpetrator was going out to work. He said to the survivor, this house needs to be spotless by the time I come home, and I'll know if it's spotless because I've hidden 5 £1 coins around this house, and if you don't find them, I'll know that you've not done a good job at cleaning. And then he left. So imagine he leaves the house at 8:30 in the morning. The survivor then is frantically cleaning the whole day, trying to find these 5 coins, but he's only hidden 4. So she's never going to find 5 because there aren't 5 to find. And what that is she's making herself really frantic. She's questioning reality because she can't find this last coin. And he knows when he left the house at 8:30 a.m. that he's going to abuse her when he comes back at 5:30 p.m. because she can't have found 5 because he didn't hide 5. So things like that, those mind games. Humiliating her, making her feel guilty, so saying that she's to blame. Isolation, so obviously that's cutting them off from family and friends. So can she use social media? Can they use phones? Can they go out at all? So not just to see other people, but are they allowed to go to the doctor? Are they allowed to go to university? Are they allowed to go to work? Are they, all of these types of things. What she reads, so access to education, books, or just fiction in general. Where she goes, there's sometimes if they don't isolate, they'll do surveillance, so they'll watch, they'll follow, so stalking. And stalking isn't just following physically, it's checking up on, it might be spyware in the phone, it might be tracking her on iPhone, like Find My iPhone or SnapMap when it first came out. SnapMap, when it first came out, it automatically showed where you were. And if you didn't know that about the update, you had to actually turn off SnapMap. SnapMap was actually automatically on. And that created a huge problem for domestic abuse survivors because perpetrators were using SnapMap to find out where the survivors were. And the survivors didn't have a clue that it was even there. So there's a real ethical issue around apps that domestic abuse workers speak about. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. So you spoke a little bit about that in emotional abuse. So this is also like forms of gaslighting. So making light of the abuse, not taking her concerns about it seriously, saying that they are exaggerating, that they're hysterical, etc. Shifting responsibility, so saying that she caused it, that she's to blame, it's her fault. If she didn't do that, then he wouldn't respond with abuse. Using children, so making her feel guilty about the children, so saying she's a bad mum, using the children to relay messages, so actually using the children in the abuse. So they might say, tell them to say nasty things. Using visitation, so once they've parted, they might use like meetings to continue harassment. And then threatening to take the child away, or say that social services will take the child away. Using male privilege, so making her do all of the cooking or the cleaning, or like making the gendered norms bigger, so traditional roles, acting like master of the castle, etc. And then lastly, economic abuse, so preventing her from keeping a job or getting a job. They might make them quit their job. Making her ask for money, so if he's got power over the incomes, he might give an allowance. If she is allowed to work, he might make sure that the money goes into a joint account. Not letting her know or have access to family income, so she might not. And also things like taking out debts in her name, taking her name off the mortgage or something like that. So there's a wide variety of way that abusers will abuse, and it's not to say that each abusive relationship is exactly the same. Some may use like 3 of them and not the others. Some may use more or less. So that's why we treat each survivor and their relationship as an individual needs-led approach, so tailored to that person. So what we're going to do is look at this in relation to pets now. So I've got a case study. So some of you may be familiar with the Hart family. Lance Hart, who was the father, he abused the family for years through coercive control. So he became obsessed with the family's money, taking his wife, who was called Claire, taking her wages and rationing them back to her. So as we saw in the previous slide, nobody else was allowed access to the family bank account. He deemed the family dog's obedience training, which was £10 a week, too expensive, and just cancelled it. And that was a form of joy for Charlotte, the daughter, and Claire, the mother. And he also cancelled Charlotte's horse riding lessons without telling her. And when the children were growing up, they became very close and attached to their mother. And Lance, the father, kind of withdrew. He became angry and paranoid that the children weren't his or weren't like him, believing that they were all conspiring against him. It took very little to trigger irrational reactions. So Charlotte once forgot to fill up the kettle, and for 3 hours he was marching around the house, yelling about it, screaming, shouting, slamming doors. And he was never physically abusive to his wife or his children, but the coercive control was really intense. And the 2 brothers, Luke and Ryan, who are in the left picture there, they believed that he wasn't physically abusive because they all worked really hard to orchestrate a calm atmosphere at home. And because they gave in to his emotional demands, they believed that he didn't escalate their behaviour into physical violence. But because it never was physical, none of the children or Claire, the wife, felt able to report it because it didn't fit the definition, their personal definition or idea about what domestic abuse actually looks like. Sorry, just making sure I've said everything. So basically, this is a quote from Luke. He said, "From the outside, we were 3 healthy, intelligent children. No one seemed concerned that much was wrong, because we were doing so well. He did attack the dogs, and he cruelly recognising that causing pain to the animals would inflict the most misery on the family. And Max, the Yorkshire Terrier that Charlotte's holding in the picture, he suffocated the dog in June 2016, and 18 days later he shot his wife 50 and his daughter 19 before shooting himself and ending his life. Luke and Ryan, the two brothers there, they are survivors. They described Claire and Charlotte as selfless, caring people, that they both loved animals, especially dogs. And Luke and Ryan now live together with the family dogs, Indy and Bella, and which Claire and Charlotte gave so much love and attention to. And the two brothers are actually now campaigners, quite famous campaigners for domestic abuse and coercive control, and really good examples of what a male ally should really be when we speak about violence against women. Someone's asked what happened to him, Mr. Hart. The father, he did kill himself, so he shot his daughter and wife, and then he shot himself. So just to go through some statistics about domestic abuse. So in the year ending March 2020, an estimated 2.4 million adults aged 16 to 74 years experienced domestic abuse over the last year. So 1.6 million girls, and this is in the UK, so 1.6 million girls and women, and 786,000 boys or men. And recent statistics about who has pets in the UK, over half of households in the UK own a pet of some sort. So the amount of animals actually witnessing or experiencing domestic abuse is extremely high as well. 21% of trans men, 16% of trans women, and 19% of non-binary individuals had experienced domestic abuse from a partner in the last year. And when we talk about LGBTQ plus individuals and risk, they're actually at higher risk than heterosexual individuals of all forms of violence, sadly. An estimated 750,000 children and young people across the UK witness or experience domestic abuse every year, and a significant proportion experience that abuse in their own adolescent relationships. And that's why the definition of domestic abuse is 16 and over, because we need to start recognising that young people are having relationships that are abusive as well, in their own right. And the last statistic is quite a well-known one: 2 women a week are killed by a current or former partner in England and Wales. And that number hasn't changed in the last decade plus. It's remained quite steady at 2 women a week in England and Wales murdered by their partner or ex-partner. Looking at pets now, so almost 9 in 10 professionals working in the domestic abuse sector in Kent, so this was a piece of research that looked specifically at Kent, have seen cases where a pet has also been abused. Over 6 in 10 of dog owners, dogs owned by survivors of domestic abuse who access Dog Trust Freedom Project in the Kent area have also been subjected to abuse. 93% of professionals said that they are also often used as a means of controlling someone experiencing domestic abuse. Almost half of professionals working in the sector are aware of domestic abuse cases where the pet has been killed. And 54% of survivors will not leave their home without knowing their pet would be safe, and on average took longer to leave than survivors without pets. We spoke about that at the beginning. So pets as a barrier to leaving the abusive relationships. For example, most refuges or accommodation not being pet friendly. We're going to watch a video now, and I really hope that you can see it. And I know that there's a minute lag, so I can't even test it. So I'm going to play it. And I really hope that you can hear it and see it. If someone, when it comes up live on your in your minute in the past, in my past. Could you just put a comment if you could hear it and see it? Thank you, guys.
And he persuaded me that they should not live in the house. If I put him outside, he'll die. If you get rid of them, if you really love me, it's me or the dogs. And he said, for you to love a being shows how wrong you are. And you start questioning yourself. So it came where I was backing down the drive with my dogs in the back of the car, taking them to the vet. He came down the drive at the last minute and said, it's okay, you don't have to do that. I'm so grateful to him. He suddenly became my hero. Yes, of course I could go out. It wasn't about me going out at all. But the next day I would be so tired that I would have fallen. My Facebook was constantly under scrutiny. He would read subtext into everything that I wrote. Oh, you've said that you've got a cold, you must be looking for attention. And little things like this, so innocent. Well, I can tell you right from the very start that I didn't realise I was a victim of domestic abuse until I heard the policeman speaking into his radio. And when I actually realised that the policeman was talking about me, I was horrified. The stigma was facing me there and then. I can't be this. I'm not a victim of this. Surely. It didn't happen amongst my friends. It didn't happen in my church. It didn't happen in my neighbourhood. It doesn't happen to people who are educated postdoctorate. It certainly doesn't happen in private detached houses on well-to-do roads or whatever. It certainly doesn't happen in the private sector. I couldn't have been further from the truth. There is no definition of who will be the next victim. It could be you next. And I think to stop that happening, it's important that everyone knows about it. There will be a time where it stops.
Okay, so I just waited a little bit just to make sure that the live catches up. So I'm just going to wait until the black screen goes to the next screen. Okay, so it seems to have caught up now. So in addition to the physical abuse that pets may suffer, 97% of professionals said they are also often used as a means of controlling someone experiencing domestic abuse. So that's from a 2018 piece of research. So what we're seeing now on the screen is the kind of power and control wheel as it relates to pets. So it's not dog specific, but it's really interesting to see. So human companion animal bond is a point of vulnerability readily exploited by abusers. So like when abusers will first contact or make contact with survivors, they don't come across as horrible, nasty people. They come across as charming, nice, loving, like nice people. And that's how they trap individuals. So what a really good tactic that they'll do is they'll ask about your hobbies, what the most important things are in your life, and they'll support you. They'll be really nice. They may even say, "Oh, really? That's what I do too. I do dog training too. I do agility as well. Wow, you've got a collie. I've got a collie." That kind of thing. And they'll use that eventually further down the line when things do start to become controlling. That they'll use that. So it's just a point that they will use anything and anything, and things like children and pets which mean a lot to people. They are like living, living, breathing things that we have massive attachments and bonds to. I certainly, if anyone said to me that they would hurt Podrick if I didn't do something, there's no question. And I think if we all really honestly looked at ourselves and our relationship with our animals, I don't think many of us could say any different. I would absolutely do anything to prevent Podrick being hurt or harmed in any way. So just quickly to go around this wheel, so they will use emotional abuse. So they might disappear the animal. So what they might put it in the car, drive it miles away, and kind of release it into kind of forested areas, or anywhere kind of remote where the animal can't get back to get back home. Very unlikely that it will be reunited with the family. So that's what disappearing is. They may give away the animal or sell the animal without the consent or permission of the owner. They may obviously kill the animal, which takes away that the survivor's source of unconditional love, and also forced participation in animal sexual abuse as well. They may make threats to harm or kill the family pet if the abused partner leaves or asserts any form of independence. Like if you speak to me like that again, I'm going to hurt the dog, or I'm going to hurt the cat, or whatever the animal is. Intimidation, so they will actually harm or kill the pet and say next time it will be you. I have quite a horrible story, but I will share it. When I was a frontline worker, I had a survivor whose ex-partner would get her a kitten, and he would let her raise the kitten, love the kitten, until it was about 6 to 8 months old, and then he would kill the cat in front of her. And then he would buy her another kitten, and it would just go on and on and on. And it's so traumatizing for the survivor, when she gets that new kitten. It's so heartbreaking. But it is, when we look at what is an effective tactic, it's a very effective tactic. Yes, hello. He wants to be involved. And isolation, so refusing them to take the pet to the vet. So they might not let them have money to spend on vet care, but they also won't let them use the car to take them to the vet, etc. They might prohibit them from socializing the dog, so they might not let them walk the dog, or they might not let them go to places where there are other dogs where they could play, or bump into people. That's the main thing, is to stop them talking to other people. They may use custody battles. So this is quite a common one for post-relationship. Basically, when you leave a relationship, they're losing their power and control, and that's almost it's really hard for them to fathom. So they will try and cling on to what power and control they have after the relationship, and especially if around pets. So because pets in the UK, and I'm sure in most places, are actually legally like property, essentially, they could take them to small claims courts, and trying to get the pet to take the pet, which obviously is also financial abuse, because that costs money to defend yourself at small claims court, etc. They might ring the police and say that you've stolen the animal, and that it's not your animal, and that's obviously theft. So they might use legal abuse that way. We spoke a little bit about economic abuse, so refusing to allow the partner to spend money on food or vet care. They might blame the abused partner or the pet for the animal cruelty. So they might not. So for example, say they don't let them buy food, and then food for the animal, and then they'll be saying things like, "Oh my god, you're such a useless. You can't even look after a dog. Look at it, it's so skinny. What are you even doing? Like you're eating, so why don't you give your food to the dog?" Like things like that. They may kill the pet and say it didn't matter because the pet was old, things like that. And they might use children, so they might harm or kill the child's pet. They might blame, so they might disappear or kill the animal and blame it on the abused partner, so that turns the children against them. I've also got written down, it's not necessarily on the wheel, but things like disrupting or undermining training deliberately. So for example, if you're wanting to use force-free positive reinforcement methods when training, they might do things like rubbing the nose of the dog in the mess when they go to the toilet inside. They might encourage the dog to jump up, undermining training around not letting them jump up at people. They might create resource guarding issues by putting their hands in the bowl, etc., or taking things away from the dog, just to disrupt that training. That is very annoying for you as well, but it also can create deliberately creating aggression or reactivity in the animal. Just going back to, I've got a case study about how the pets was used, using children, intimidation and emotional abuse. So one survivor recalled how she had been unable to find accommodation for her son and 2 cats, and so ended up leaving the animals with her violent ex-partner when she fled the home. 3 days later, he tracked her down at her parents' house and waited outside, holding one of the cats up by the throat, calling out to their son. She said, "He was bargaining my cat for my child. He ended up throwing the cat, but the cat, they were later reunited safely." So just to say that he didn't further harm the animal. But just lots of different ways in which pets can be used, especially for people like us who our pets are either your actual job or the light of your life. It's it's very hurtful for them to be used. They may also withdraw access to an assistance or service dog. So if you have an illness or some form of illness or mental health, struggle with mental health, and you have an emotional support animal, or you have a service animal or an assistance animal, they may prevent you being able to have access to that animal. They may also hide any forms of medication, or say you've already taken medication, etc. If you have a business together, so if you have a joint business, they might, or even if you're self-employed, they might slander the business. If you're obviously in joint business with someone, it could be harder to leave and then set up again. For example, you need to speak about clients. They might write things, reviews on your Facebook page saying that you're like not a good trainer, or or like complete blatant lies that you use aversive methods, etc. They might do things like sabotaging shows. So they might, so if you're a groomer, they might the night before you're due to go to a show, they might shave the animal, or they might mess it up in some way so that you're not able to show it. They might so if you're due to go to an agility competition, they might break the dog's leg before you to go, so sabotaging that. And also they might use the dog as a literal weapon. So they might get a dog, train it to become aggressive, and use that dog. So say it's his dog, he makes it, he kind of abuses the animal so much that it becomes aggressive, and then he uses that against the survivor. So he says, if you annoy me, I'm going to set my dog on you, that kind of thing. So just some other forms of abuse that may happen. So physically punishing a dog, by hitting, kicking, burning, cutting, etc. Excessive restraining of a dog, so chaining them up, putting them in a crate that's too small, keeping in a muzzle all day that's maybe too small, not fitted correctly. verbally punishing the dog, so yelling, screaming, calling them names, over pressurizing a dog to perform a task or pushing them past their capabilities, rejecting a dog's need for affection and attention, socially isolating the dog from people and other animals, for example, not taking them on walks, not letting them play with other dogs, neglecting a dog or failing to provide proper care, so feeding and grooming, failing to consult a veterinarian when the animal is in need of medical attention, terrorising or otherwise deliberately inflicting pain or stress onto a dog. In the UK, we have the in England and Wales, we have the Animal Welfare Act of 2006. In Scotland, there's the Animal Health and Welfare Act of 2006 as well, and the Welfare of Animals Act in Northern Ireland, which came in 2011. They all provide similar legislation around punish cruelty to animals and prevent animals from suffering. The Act makes it an offence to cause unnecessary suffering to an animal and imposes a duty of care on anyone responsible for an animal to take reasonable steps to ensure an animal's welfare is protected. Suffering is defined as both physical and mental, and the duty of care is clarified as providing for the animal's 5 welfare needs, which include the following: need for a suitable environment, need for a suitable diet, need to be able to exhibit normal behavioural patterns, any need it has to be housed with or apart from other animals, their need to be protected from pain, suffering, injury, and disease. So we do have specific laws around protection of animals. We won't go into detail today on how much we think they work, or how much they're taken seriously, or whether we think that the punishment is enough when someone does not care or abuse an animal properly. But we do have those laws in the UK. I just wanted to talk very quickly as well about pets as protective factors, because it's really important. So for many survivors and their children, pets may also be significant sources of emotional and social support during the abuse. So the human companion animal bond may be especially strong in those circumstances, when all you've got left is your animal that shows you nothing but unconditional love. That bond is extremely strong. And there's a quote here from Dr. Heather Fraser. She says, animals also provide what is called a non-deliberative, non-talk-based interaction that takes people beyond the categories that other humans assign them. So they're not just a single mum or a domestic violence victim or a fat slut. They just are who they are, and their animal is responding to them as they are. Dogs particularly can act like every day with you is the best day on earth, that you're the most spectacular person. If they have a close bond with you and you don't get that kind of affection from a lot of others. So Dr. Heather Fraser is a co-author along with Nick Taylor of the Rescue Me, Rescue You book that I posted in the group in the resources section. So if anyone wants to read more about it, it's quite an expensive book, so you might be able to find like summaries online. I've also posted some other resources that are free as well. And just some survivor testimony there. So a survivor admitted her dog had helped her maintain the will to live, and that without him she probably would have succeeded in killing herself. He is my healing process. He's therapy in a sense. So looking now at humans, dogs, and the impact of trauma. So when I was researching and reading around this topic, Dr. Patricia McConnell she's got quite a useful article, which I believe I put in the resources section. But this quote really stood out to me because working as I have with human survivors of trauma, this really resonated with me. So she says, I've believed for years that many of the dogs I've worked with had behavioural problems because of some kind of trauma. And I think a lot about what we've learned working with human trauma victims can be applied to dogs. And then veterinarian Dr. Laurie Teller also said the symptoms of PTSD in dogs are similar to those in humans. As intelligent mammals, both human beings and dogs share key aspects of how the brain responds to threat. As you watch the video, so we're going to watch a short video now about what happens to the brain and our neurobiology when we're faced with threat. And as you watch the video, you can compare it with the canine brain on the right. Specifically looking at the prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and hippocampus.
Today's session is about trauma. The latest in brain science will help you in your work. I'll start with a tour of the parts of the human brain. The reptilian brain maintains basic bodily functions. The limbic system is also instinctive. It deals with fear and pleasure. For example, you pat a dog, it senses pleasure, and without thinking, wags its tail. The neocortex is the site of logic, imagination, planning, and control. It's more sophisticated, but because it's conscious, it's slower than the older parts of the brain. The amygdala is a key part of the limbic system. It has one job, to sense danger and set off the alarm. When it's a matter of survival, the primitive parts of the brain override the conscious part. There are 3 possible survival responses: fight, floods the body, and all systems to survival are switched off. Normally, the job of the hippocampus is to file memories so you can retrieve them later. But in times of danger, it stops filing memories, which makes it harder to gather evidence later on. Instead, the hippocampus switches to pumping cortisol. What's useful about cortisol is it stops us feeling pain, so we can focus on survival. Can anyone give me an example?
A farming accident where a man carried his own arm for a mile without feeling any pain?
Yes, excellent example. It is an evolutionary safety mechanism which is fast and instinctive. In essence, it's our body's very clever way of protecting us. To recap, an example of the 3 parts of the brain working together. You're standing at a bar. Your reptilian brain is keeping your heart beating. You're enjoying the pleasure of a nice pint with your limbic system. You're using your neocortex to work out if there's time for another before the last train. What could happen to make the amygdala kick in? What if this happened? The way you'd respond would depend not on your logical brain, but on your instinctive brain.
Okay, so I hope that you found the video useful. Actually, I'm just going to wait until you finish watching the video on the live because I'm watching it on my phone. Okay, so I can see we're onto this screen now. So in the video, it speaks about actually. So the video was developed firstly mainly for police. So we still have a real problem, but we have a real problem in the police with police not understanding trauma and how trauma works and how that relates to kind of getting evidence essentially. So that's who the video was essentially developed for. So it does miss out some other forms of the trauma responses. So it speaks about fight, flight, and freeze. But those of us who work frontline with survivors, we actually use 5 adrenal responses. So I'm going to go through the 5 adrenal responses now as they relate to humans. And then on the next slide, I'm going to go through the different trauma responses with dogs. So first we've got fight. Actually, before I start as well, so practitioners and academics of human trauma tend to talk about the 5 adrenal responses, the ones I'm going to show you now on the screen, that we have when we are faced with serious danger. Our brains obviously do tend to perceive domestic or sexual abuse as a form of serious danger. However, some individuals will not have a trauma response during abuse if they've been effectively groomed to believe that the abuser loves them or that they love their abuser. This means that for some of them, they could be abused for prolonged periods of time and not necessarily show any trauma responses until they are much older. For example, if they're abused in childhood, they may then show trauma responses as adults. or have started to process what the person did to them, for example, after leaving a domestic abuse relationship. For that reason, we use the 5 Fs with caution. Not everyone will experience them. Not everyone will have one set trauma response either. In fact, most of us will be able to recall times when we have responded to different dangers in different ways. I also know that we're coming up to the hour, but because I've started a little bit late, I will run over. So if anyone does need to go, that's absolutely fine. You can watch it on when it's the recording. But if you're happy to stay, I will finish the complete presentation. So looking at fight then, this trauma response is where we may try to push, kick, punch the aggressor, so the perpetrator. But yelling, shouting and arguing verbally are also forms of fight responses. So it's hard because people often think fight, oh, that must mean kicking, punching, etc. But it actually, if you are verbally saying stop, or you're verbally saying get off me, or you're verbally arguing back, or having an opinion, or exerting independence, that falls under a fight response as well. The fight response is actually the rarest form of trauma response to interpersonal violence. So when we look at domestic abuse and sexual violence, fight is the least likely to happen. However, as a society, we expect people to have fought, which is why there's a lot of self-blame and self-guilt that comes into survivors when they don't. So they ask themselves, why didn't I fight? Why didn't I struggle? Why didn't I scream? Why didn't I do anything? Why did I let them do this to me? And it's not. And it's important to say that it really is a very rare trauma response. Even if you've done your self-defense classes, even if you're trained to respond with a fight response, when you're actually faced with the threat, more often than not, your brain will not go into fight. So what I do when I work with survivors is I spend a lot of time unpicking that with them. Because of this internal thing. This myth also feeds into criminal justice because juries are made up from peers. They're made up with people with their own biases and their own opinions and their own myths. And sadly, they will they will wonder, well, why didn't they fight back if they were that bothered about what was happening, especially with regards to sexual abuse. So with regards to most forms of sexual violence, we don't see any injuries internally or externally on survivors because they don't go into fight. They go into one of the other forms or one of the other trauma responses, and that's to keep them safe, because if someone's much bigger than you and you fight, the violence may escalate into you actually dying or being killed. So fight doesn't really compute as a useful trauma response in some circumstances. So flight then, this trauma response is where we might try to avoid, escape or get away from the abuse. We may try to do this in many different ways. It does not mean you have to run. Lots of people have this myth around flight as well, that it means running away. Actually, there's lots of little things that also count as a flight response. So if someone's coming towards you and you take a step back, just one step, that's a flight response. If you turn your head away, that is a flight response because you're trying to get away. You putting your hands up, that is a flight response because it's an active kind of trying to create distance and space. Some people have flight responses they cannot act on. So sometimes your brain will think, I need to run, I need to run, I need to run, but you can't run. So it will go. So if that comes across your mind first, that fails. It will go into a different one, which we're going to look at now. Also, similar to fight, flight is extraordinarily rare trauma response in humans. So running away or trying to escape, it isn't one that's often used by the brain in human trauma. Freeze. This trauma response is most common in humans. So 70% of survivors will freeze during a rape, sexual assault, or other form of abuse. So that's from Muller et al. 2017, Eaton 2019. A freeze response is one in which we feel as though we can't move, can't talk, can't fight the person off, or do anything to protect ourselves. People who freeze do so to limit further harm from the perpetrator. So in the short term, physical survival is greater if the body yields. However, this trauma response often induces feelings of guilt. So it's similar to the others, like they freeze, they don't know why they've frozen. They feel like, well, I didn't run, I didn't fight, I didn't say anything. So I must have done something wrong. I'm the problem. But actually, it's because the brain, in like 1/3000th of a second, so extremely quickly, has decided that freeze is the best way forward to actual survival. Flop. So flop is argued to be a reaction to such high levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone, which we just saw, in the blood, that our body shuts down non-essential muscles and body parts to keep us alive. This causes us to like flop, so we're very easily, so it might be going limp. You might feel like a rag doll. The body and the mind becomes more malleable. You're more easily kind of led. You're more easily kind of moved into different positions, etc. So psychologically, it's more bearable if the higher brain functions are offline. So that neocortex that we saw in the video. And then lastly, for humans, we have the friend response. And this is one that lots of people don't know about. And this is where we might try to talk the abuser down or act friendly in order to elicit friendliness back. So lots of survivors use this approach, especially those in long-term abusive situations with parents, carers, partners, or ex-partners. It's common for people who have a friend response to trauma to try and bargain with the abuser, to try and calm them down, to agree to say one sex act but ask not to be hurt, or to agree to something to protect someone else, so pets or kids, etc. Friend response, when we look at stranger danger, is quite interesting as well. So if you're, most of us have been in a club environment where we've been like, a guy has come over to speak to us and we don't really want to speak to them. Maybe they ask for our number, we give the wrong number. So that's a friend response because they don't know it's a wrong number. So there's no no escalation of the behaviour. Or if someone is like if we're in a group with our girlfriends dancing and a guy comes over and he tries grinding on one of our friends, instead of going over to the guy, pushing him off and telling him to F off, as a group, girls will often kind of dance over to the friend and kind of dance away, and the perpetrator or that guy usually just goes, oh wow, that failed, goes back to his mates. But if you'd gone over and you'd pushed him and you said, get the F off, what you doing, blah blah blah, the likelihood is that he would respond aggressively as well. So it's all about minimizing the response and surviving or getting out alive, essentially. Looking at dogs then, so obviously it's very similar to humans, but there are some key differences as well. So with a fight response in a dog might look like hard stares. The dog may raise its hackles, ears may flatten, they might growl, they might snarl, they might show their teeth, they might lunge, even if it's just a small forward motion. They might bark, air snap, attempt to bite, or bite. So they're all kind of fight responses. Flight, so that could be for dogs running or dashing away, hiding, going down low and crawling on their stomach, tail tucked more under the legs, so trying to be small, basically. So freeze, so the dog may stand still or walk very slowly, so like they're in jelly. They might hold their breath. They'll have kind of a fixed glazed look. The difference here with in dogs is that freeze can very quickly turn into a fight response. So whereas in humans that doesn't really happen. In humans, if you freeze, you're likely to freeze for the entire abuse. But and that may be true for some dogs, but we know that obviously with other dogs they might freeze just before they go into fight. So that's one of the main differences. Ooh. Flop faint. So this response is quite rare from my research around trauma responses in dogs. It's where the dog drops down to the ground and just refuses to move or interact. So basically just goes flat on the ground, just doesn't move. So it's a bit of a freeze, but in a kind of on down position, I suppose. Friend, friend, I would say things like appeasement behaviours. Might be nuzzling, licking, rolling onto the back, submissive urination, jumping up at the person, paw lifts or pawing motions, teeth clacking, lying down, turning the head away, so averting eye contact. Ears might be pulled back or down, tail may be wagging expressively with wide sweeping movements as well. Fall is kind of a displacement behaviour in response to stress. So things like zoomies, acting silly, chasing tail, play bows, grabbing an item and running around, chewing the lead if they're on the lead, hyperactive responses. And then fret, so things like pacing, panting, becoming overly active on it or unable to settle down, or they wait and watch vigilantly, they may try to dig, scratch doors. They might be highly distracted, so they might not take a treat or a toy. Reactions obviously may differ based on the breed, the age of the dog, and their history as well. And the key takeaway from looking at trauma responses in both humans and dog is that survival is key. And this quote from Peter Levine, if anyone's interested in trauma and humans, he writes about trauma and humans, but he said success doesn't mean winning, it means surviving. And it doesn't really matter how you get there. The objective is to stay alive until the danger has passed. And you really can't underestimate that we're talking about life and death here. Like, perpetrators of domestic abuse are extremely dangerous people. So just to say that, the brain isn't concerned. In humans, it's not concerned with what's a police officer going to think, what's a jury going to think, what will a judge say. The brain's primary function is to keep us alive. If by freezing we manage to survive, then in its terms, it's done a brilliant job, like yay, brain. This is why sometimes someone who flops or freezes the first time something bad happens, they might be more likely to flop or freeze the next time, as the brain remembers, oh, I survived last time by freezing. That was really good. I got out alive. So then they might freeze. It might bypass even thinking about fight and flight and go straight to freeze as its kind of default. Depending on the approach taken by the community, institution, or professional, the survival animal might be either seen as mentally ill or having disordered thinking, possessed by demons or evil forces / spirits, or just being a bad dog. The way that a truly trauma-informed approach to how we approach humans and dogs who have experienced abuse is to see their trauma responses as rational. They've been through something extreme, and this is their response to that, all those instances. Their responses are a coping mechanism that makes sense to them. It may not make sense to us as outsiders, but this is why we engage in active listening to both human and dogs, so that we can understand their perspectives. So, for example, some of the triggers that humans and dogs may have may not make sense to other people. So I had a survivor who really struggled seeing men with really big beards in leather jackets, or people riding motorbikes, because her perpetrator had all of those attributes. But if she was with a friend and she's walking down the street and a man with a beard is walking towards her and she suddenly has a panic attack, her friend's going to be like, what is going on? Like, what's triggered this panic attack? They might not understand. So we really need to listen to what's going on with that personal animal. Their response is valid. How they feel is reasonable. They have the right to feel the way they do. And they're common. Millions of people and animals respond in similar ways to similar traumas. Survivors aren't alone, so they're not unique responses. Their response is justified. If you've been abused, couldn't some of your trauma responses be justified? For example, it's right that you feel angry. It's okay that you feel angry. No one should have to suffer abuse. And lastly, that they're natural. Trauma responses are brain and bodily reactions to trauma that we've just seen. So coming up to kind of the end of the topic, the talk now. So just looking at some of the ways that people respond to trauma. I'll just move me so you can see. So physical impact in humans, things like avoiding the doctors or hospital if they have injuries and infections, for example, sexually transmitted infections or sexually transmitted diseases, involuntary shaking, heart racing, heart palpitations, sweats, aches and pains, chronic pain, or things like fibromyalgia, disordered eating, IBS, or nausea, so irritable bowel syndrome, or feeling sick. Survivors may be easily startled, jumpy. They may be fatigued, might be really tired all the time or exhausted, and they might have muscle tension and chest tightness. For psychological impacts, it could be things like difficulty concentrating, having flashbacks or disassociation. So a flashback is where you go, they kind of have a glazed look on their face and they're like reliving the abuse in their brains. Disassociation is where you feel an out of body experience. So you might replay the abuse, but you might feel like you're standing on the other side of the room watching the abuse. Anxiety or hypervigilance, low mood, so depression, severe fear, difficulty forming or sustaining close relationships. Let's see, self-harm, having suicidal ideation or making attempts on your life. Anger, mood swings, disbelief, shock, denial, disbelief, guilt or self-blame. Triggers, we spoke quickly about that a minute ago. Post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, difficulty processing oral information or remembering information, difficulty making decisions. So if someone's made your decisions for you for 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 odd years, when you then come out of the relationship and you have options, it can be quite difficult for survivors to actually make even simple decisions, because they almost go straight into like a fear. The fear just comes with, oh my gosh, like consequences. If I make that decision, consequences. So it can be quite hard for them at the beginning when they're first out of relationships. And then it might change how they view other people and the world. So it can directly challenge beliefs about the world, themselves, and life in general. It shatters the view of the world as safe, predictable, and secure. It shatters the view of life being manageable and meaningful. And it could elicit fear of those who share identity with the abuser. So we spoke about that, about triggers just a second ago, the men with beards kind of thing. And then in dogs, physical impacts they could have, so they obviously as well could have wounds, injuries, etc. They may pant excessively. They might have infections or brain injuries, especially with strangulation. Brain injuries are quite common because the lack of oxygen. Broken bones, unhealthy teeth and gums, physical pain, involuntary shaking, disordered eating, so they might refuse to eat. They might have malnutrition or starvation. They may be easily startled or jumpy. They may also have heart palpitations. They may have physical discomfort from insufficient grooming. So things like, doodles who need to be groomed regularly. If they haven't been groomed regularly, they might have clumps of fur that kind of create skin irritation, skin things. Flea, tick, worm infestation. So if they're not getting regular flea or tick or worm treatment, or they've not getting kind of worm counts, etc., then they may be infected with those kinds of pests. Psychological impact. So they may also have difficulty concentrating and remembering things with regards to training, etc. And they can have anxiety or hypervigilance as well. Post being taken away from the abusive relationship. They can also suffer with low mood, feeling down. They may have difficulty forming or sustaining bonds. They might show avoidance. They may change moods very quickly. They might have triggers, so paired association. So for some dogs who have been in a house where there has been domestic abuse, things like even raising your voice slightly may lead them to go into, say, a flight. They might go really small. They might hide just from raising your voice slightly. They may have fear-based reactivity. They may also have a form of post-traumatic stress. They might also find it difficult, again, being allowed to make decisions, having not being allowed to make decisions. They might not know how to play or interact. They might know how to play, not just with other dogs, but play in general. So if they've never seen a toy before, if they've never being played with another person properly before, then that might be quite unusual to them. And also they may not know how to play with other dogs or interact with other dogs properly, or other animals as well. And for them, it shatters their view of the world as safe, predictable and secure. It also shatters their view of life as being manageable and meaningful, and it could also elicit fear of those who share identity with the abuser. So the good news, because this has been a really depressing talk, and I hope you're all, really hope you're all doing okay. Humans and dogs have huge capacity to adapt and change. A big part of using a trauma-informed approach is that what's happened to you in the past does not define your future, and you have huge capacity to change with that support. So with time, empathy, compassion, understanding and support, things can improve. I've got a list which I'll put in the event as well. So these are some of the resources and projects available to animals who need help when their owner is fleeing domestic abuse. Variety of areas. These are UK based ones because obviously that's where I am. But there may be others in your local area that aren't on this list as well. So if you do need one, it's best to contact your local human domestic abuse service, and they will be able to tell you if there is a service running in your area. It's a really bit of a shame because so for example, you can see here the Dogs Trust Freedom Project. It covers Greater London and the home counties, Yorkshire, the North East and North West of England, East Anglia and mainland Scotland. There's nothing kind of south. So Gloucestershire, where I'm at the moment, I don't know of any there. So it is best to kind of look at your local area and see what's around in terms of support for animals fleeing domestic abuse. Then for humans, there is the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, which is a 24-hour service, 365 days of the year. You can speak to specialists in violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence. The Live Fear Free Helpline is the National Welsh Helpline. They also are 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and very well-trained people on the helpline that can help you if you need to leave domestic abuse, but not just domestic abuse, all forms of violence against women, so-called honour-based abuse, FGM, female genital mutilation, those kinds of things. They are there to talk, to help, and if you need practical based support, they can help as well. You've got Rape Crisis, which is national. They have a helpline and a website. There's also Gallup for specific lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer plus support. And there's also the Respect men's advice line for male survivors. For male survivors of sexual abuse, there's a London-based charity called Survivors UK. However, it is you can ring the helpline from anywhere in the UK. It's just that they're based in London. That's where the helpline is. And I'm just going to do question and answers. So I will quickly scroll. Does anyone have any questions, please write them in the chat now, and I'll get them. And I'm going to just scroll back through and see if there's any already been asked. Someone's asked about the can I list the articles. They're in the event, so if you scroll down through the event, there's a resources post, and it has the links and the book titles to those research that I was speaking about earlier. If there aren't any questions, you can post questions in the group and I'll answer them there as well. We're going to end with a 1 minute silence. So I'll just wait for the live to catch up. Okay, so I'm going to start the 1 minute silence now for those of you who want to stay. And this is just a time to reflect on all of the humans and animals who've lost their lives through domestic abuse. So I'm starting the minute now. Okay, thank you everyone for attending today. I hope you enjoyed it and that you found it useful. Thank you.